Welcome to Doc's Lab and our second Master Series. Welcome to Doc's Lab on our second Master Series. I do believe this is the 108th video in our second Master Series, the 57th video on basic processors, the 20th video on sculpting processors, and the 4th video on saturation. And in this video, we are going to look at using some saturation on a track. So first of all, if you don't have Trash 2, that you're going to want to get a plugin that does a couple of different things. First of all, we are going to be going not off a test tone generator like you see here. We'll be going off the track. So you're going to want to have yourself a track set up that's a vocal, preferably, that's been cleaned up as well as possible, like we talked about, EQ'd slightly so that it's got decent equalization, and you can add a little bit of reverberation, not much, go real light on it, that way that it doesn't interfere too much, but it helps it make sound not quite so dry, to help you in understanding what you're doing on this testing. So first of all, when we pull out, we got our 10-tone generator set here to 440, just so we can visualize this, because basically what we're going to do, depending on which plugins you use to do this, won't really, as long as you can attain these, because with my presets, I've got a saturation full spectrum that we've talked about, that if I show you on here and I turn this on, that we've talked about that getting a nice full spectrum saturation. It's got some fold over distortion going back here that we'll have to clean up. And we have some odd harmonics that you can see here that are just odd harmonics. We have even harmonics that just, you can see the odd drop off, just even harmonics, even and odd. So we have a combination of them both. And we have a good square clipping distortion that if I turn it up, it will go up a little bit louder, and an aggressive distortion, so that we have some, those are the most basic fundamental saturations that we deal with. Most of the time, true saturation is coming from odd harmonics or even harmonics and non-harmonic distortion, which is sometimes difficult to recreate without doing clipping distortion and then just bringing it up in there slightly. So just kind of keep that in mind. Those are what we're going to be looking at when we start listening to this. So I suggest you get some headphones on, and what we're going to do is in this first part, we're going to listen to how these different saturations affect this vocal, and then in the next video, we're going to combine it with noise so we can hear the combination of them both for a finished product, because most times saturation is considered noise and saturation that is basically normally considered the saturation that is the end product of, quote unquote, analog warmth and most things like that. And that is good low end saturation, the combination of them. So we'll look at them being combined because it is different, one of them or just the other by themselves. There's a different end product that has a much bigger impact on the overall sound, that can change the sound dramatically to help improve it. So get yourself ready, get out some headphones, and I'll be back in a minute so we can listen to some saturation applied. Okay, so first of all, when we get started, is that I want to address something really quick. That let's say that we talked about, when we talked about doing the full spectrum harmonics, so if we were doing the one that was full spectrum, the saturation full spectrum that was going all the way across like I showed you, that normally that's a fill. And I'll explain to you where that's useful really quick, because we'll look at it, but an application of it most of the time is, let's say that I've gotten on there and I've taken this vocal and I've added some odd harmonics to it, and maybe some even odd harmonics with another plugin next to it. But let's just say for an example that I've added some odd harmonics to it, and the odd harmonics are adding some saturation to it and warming it up quite a bit, but it's still a little bit dry because, you know, I'm recording pretty well and doing a good job, and I really want to dirty it up a little bit. A lot of the times that saturation would go on afterwards. So I would do like doing some odd harmonics or something to try to add some odd harmonic saturation in there, but it's still a little bit too clean. And so I'll go in there on something behind it and add like saturation full spectrum, you know, coming up underneath it. That's just kind of dirtying up. It's almost adding like you'll have like clean odd harmonic saturation and some non-harmonic distortion that adds that non-harmonic distortion element to it that makes it a more realistic sounding analog emulation or saturation, because it's not just really clean, even, or odd harmonics. There's odd harmonic distortion in there. And you also can add it in there by splitting the channels and doing it just on the right side to blend it together or something like that, or using something like Sigmod to split the channels. So keep that in mind. We'll look at that saturation, but most of the time that's the application. So you'd actually have three separate things that actually work out into your good saturation. That'd be like odd harmonic saturation, that full spectrum saturation, and your noise working together. So, and you can really blend those three together to really come out with some cool things. And we'll look at that. But right now, we just want to look at some saturation. So let's look at this and say, we've got this vocal. So we're going to put on our headphones. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play this vocal across here, and we'll listen to it dry a couple times after we're going to start out looking at saturation full spectrum. Now, when I add this, remember that as I bring this level up, that the volume's going to go down a little bit because of the odd harmonic issue I had. So I had to bring down the actual levels inside of the plugin that's the main running into it, because it actually, the volume level drops a little bit as I bring up the wet into it, but you can still hear the effect. So after you added it, you'd have to push the sound up, just like, you know, gain matching or something on a lot of plugins after you get done before you render or something like that. So let's listen to this first and hear the effects of it. Do your magic, make me sound good. 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 Now you can hear right about where I left it. As it goes up, you can hear it bringing up that full spectrum saturation that really causes like non-harmonic clipping distortion all over the place without any prominent even or odd harmonics in the type of distortion that causes. The volume level's dropping off as it goes down because I had to adjust on my pre here on this plugin. Otherwise, I got tons of odd harmonics that I couldn't contain, so I had to adjust it with this to bring the odd harmonics down. But you can hear how that dirties that up some, and you can bring that in lightly after doing some normal saturation, even or odd harmonics, or even in odd harmonics, to help give it a little bit more non-harmonic distortion element, which them combined together we'll look at when we start looking at adding odd and even harmonics here in a moment. So that gives you an idea of what that sounds like just off that vocal that was clean. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to look at odd harmonics and how that affects it. So give me just a second and let's listen to what that does.
Do your magic, make me sound good. 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 Do your magic, make me sound good.
Now you can really hear the effects of those odd harmonics. Odd harmonics are more musical, so really keep that in mind. They're a lot easier to add to any sound without it starting to cause it to sound non-musical type of saturation or distortion. And you hear, even when it's pushed up all the way, that we've got just clean odd harmonics for the most part. So it doesn't really sound like serious clipping distortion that has a bunch of non-harmonic distortion and things like that. It's starting to sound distorted when I put it all the way up wet, but it really doesn't sound like that clipping distortion because it's pretty clean, just odd harmonics being added to it. So you can add quite a bit before it really starts to sound like bad distortion, to really help when something needs some odd harmonics to help it sound a little bit better. So let's take a really quick look and hear what even harmonics sound. This is just even harmonics going on there, and let's listen to what that sounds like.
Do your magic, make me sound good. 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 Do your magic, make me sound good.
Again, you can hear the effect, and again, it's very clean, just even harmonics. So even put up way high, that it really isn't sounding like really bad distortion from like overdriving the speed capabilities of a circuit or something like that. So you can push it quite high. And you also, if you paid attention, that the saturation, the distortion saturation caused from the even harmonics isn't quite as musical. If you combine them both, you can combine them both at different levels to really achieve a nice saturation that is, you know, more consistent with overdriving the amperage capabilities a little bit and overdriving the speed capabilities a little bit to attain some really nice harmonics, which we'll look at it in a moment as that fairly even. But you can hear the difference. Next, we want to look at even and odd harmonics and see what that does. So give me just a second, let's listen to that.
Do your magic, make me sound good. 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 Do your magic, make me sound good.
Now you can hear on there it's combining them both, but fairly even with that preset. So you're getting a pretty good understanding of those sounds, those different types of saturations. Next, the only other one we want to look at this square clipping one, not aggressive distortion, that can be put in very lightly as a little bit more aggressive saturation for really making things dirty. But let's listen to the square clipping as we bring in. You can't put in much, but you can bring it in there and hear it very rapidly. And most of the time, this is very light, the kind of saturation that you'd be putting in there, because it's normally pretty aggressive. But let's listen.
Do your magic, make me sound good. 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 Do your magic, make me sound good.
You can hear immediately how it starts to actually warp the audio. So that's a lot of times that aggressive saturation that I use for different things, it's very hard to do that, especially on things you're working at on cleanness. So you got a kind of an understanding of that. So basically, with that understanding of it, you know, on a vocal or something, it's pretty simple. Most of the time, you'll be wanting to add some odd harmonics or way more musical. But a lot of times, saturation is a combination of even and odd. And after you get done doing any work with a little bit of odd or even harmonic distortion, possibly some square clipping distortion, that you might want to add some of that saturation full spectrum coming up underneath it on another plugin to add a little bit more lifelike to it. So what we're going to do is right now is what I'm going to do is on this plugin, I'm going to add Odd Harmonics, and I'm going to adjust it to where I think it should be for this application, and then I'm going to open up Trash 2 and I'm going to add some full spectrum saturation. So listen to that, because basically I'm going to turn this off. I'm going to play it to you with the noise that's on the file, so you can hear. I was going to make a separate video for this, but it should be pretty obvious so you can hear a combination of these, because I'm going to add a little bit of, I'm going to turn on the noise so you can hear the noise with it and without it. I'm going to leave the noise on. Then I'm going to do some odd harmonics work and bring that up into it. And then I'm going to do some full spectrum saturation that I showed you coming up underneath that to kind of blend that together on this vocal to try to come up with a nice sound and saturation that I think will blend really well. This is opinionated things, so basically what you apply here and what it can be very different with different instruments and things like that. So you have to kind of, you know, mess around with it to see what you can come up with. But let's try to do this with odd harmonics first of all and see how it comes out sounding with just some odd harmonics.
Do your magic, make me sound good. 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 Do your magic, make me sound good.
Okay, right there you heard me add odd harmonics into it. And about there sounds pretty good. So, I mean, it's kind of giving a little bit more musical odd harmonics into it because it was a little dry after I cleaned it up, EQ'd it, and reverberated that track. And that sounds pretty good. So next what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this one off, and then I'm going to go to my next one, and I'm going to try to add some full spectrum saturation to see if that helps it some. So I'm going to go into my presets. I'm going to pick this full spectrum saturation on there, and I'm going to bring that up into it and see how that sounds and if that adds any elements to it. So let's listen to see if that might help the sound some.
Do your magic, make me sound good. 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 Do your magic, make me sound good.
Now you can hear that I barely added any of it in there because it would be very low level non-harmonic distortion on top of that odd harmonics to try to get that sound. It's opinionated, and I don't know how well you'll be able to hear it on your end, but right to me here it doesn't sound too bad. So if I take that like that and I have those both on there, I've got the noise going on there also. So let's listen to it without the noise and with the noise at the levels that I have desired. And I'll bring them up a little bit and then back down to where I think they sound good. That is white pink noise to emulate, you know, normal warmth through an electrical system, and that brown gray blue mix for that vocal we had showed when we were talking about noise. The combination of them was sound sculpting and emulating ham-along warmth to combine with sound sculpting or with the saturation, and let's see what that comes out sounding like.
Do your magic, make me sound good. 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 Do your magic, make me sound good.
Now on this track now, what we have is that clean track that's been EQ'd and reverberated so it doesn't sound too dry. And we've added some odd harmonics that are musical, that add a little bit of warmth to it, and with musical sounding saturation. We add a little bit of non-harmonic distortion or saturation full spectrum to emulate non-harmonic distortion saturations, and then we added the noise to it. So that basically what we come out with sounding, that what we come out getting from adding the three of those. So them alone, let's listen to them with that all and listen to them by themselves with that. So first of all, I'll play the track by itself, then I'll add the non-harmonic distortion, then I'll add the full spectrum saturation, and then I'll add the two noises, and we'll see what we come out sounding like.
Do your magic, make me sound good. 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 Do your magic, make me sound good.
Now with those settings like that, I got a pretty nice saturation to where I've got some nice odd harmonics that have brought up that musical saturation sound in the vocal a little bit. I've got some full spectrum saturation that is emulating like we talked about, non-harmonic distortion saturation. I've got some white and pink noise to emulate like warmth, from electrical system, and I've got some sound sculpting blue and gray noise that's helping my lower end a little bit in my vocal. So between those saturations and the noise, the combination of them is what we're really looking for. So I could make videos that go for hours and hours and hours on this, but the basic combination is that is what we're shooting for, and really be taking the time to experiment with that, combining them, mixing them, and coming up with something that sounds good when we really want to do good saturation in our lower end is a combination of those two things. Or I should say those three things. Now, when we get to looking at something like when we go in here and I go, okay, well, I really want to add, you're going to have occasions where you're going to want to add even harmonics, which normally means there's a lot of heavy odd harmonics going on in the sound and you want to try to even out. Think about distortion in comparison to a violin. Violin's got a lot of even and odd harmonics, and the even harmonics really smooth the sound out. So if you have a lot of aggressive odd harmonics, and even harmonics type of saturation can really help even that out, to help smooth the sound out. And sometimes you can really get away with creating an even and odd harmonic type of situation with plugins or with trash too, that the combinations of them both at correct levels, when you combine them, that you come out, or putting in one plugin after another, can really help you start to try to mix them and blend them until you come out with the right combination, depending if you want a little bit more odd harmonic-y sound, or you're trying to even smooth it out with a little bit of even harmonics and things like that. And then that saturation full spectrum really helps kind of bridge that gap between even and odd harmonic work and noise, because you got like even and odd harmonics, then you got full spectrum noise, and that full spectrum saturation is somewhere in between there that really kind of fills in that space. So it's kind of three tiers. So you have three tiers happening there for good saturation on any instrument track that you're doing. Now, granted, this sounds like a lot of micro work, but we're talking about being that next level master audio engineer. So you mastering this concept and understanding this concept can help you take something that's to go and yeah, dude, because it can, a lot of times, like I said, if you follow the things I'm talking about and you think about that, and then you start experimenting, adding things to it, and then understand those three tiers as you're working through that, to help blend them and mix them together to try to achieve a really nice three-tiered saturation that is going to really do justice to that sound. You think about it almost as powerful as equalization in the lower end in your saturation area, because it's hugely important. You'd be surprised how many people, an old piece of analog gear and a certain old microphone that add just the right amount of saturation and noise together in conjunction, they will spend hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to get that, to have it in their studio. And if you asked them if they could have one of all of them, but it would cost them $5 bazillion, they'd say, yeah, dude, all right, that's right, just put them in the back, no problem. Yeah, dude. They wouldn't know you, because they'd be like, yeah, because I know Bob comes in and I'm going to want to do this a little bit differently with him to get the right noises mixed with a nice full spectrum saturation and the amounts of that and the right even or odd harmonics that are going to be coming off those pieces of hardware that do that, or compressors and all kinds of things, to achieve just the right type of saturation that's going to just push that sound over the top to where it's just like, yeah, dude, that's it. You know, right. And the more you practice it, the better you will understand that. Because the more you experiment with the even and the odd harmonics, the even and odd harmonics, the saturation, full spectrum, bringing it up in there to bridge the gap between noise and harmonic saturation work that you're doing, that to bridge that gap, to add some non-harmonic distortion saturation type that is really, you know, analog gear, you know, not functioning properly, that does, they found if used properly or with compressors, adds really nice sound, you know, to sound sometimes, and they'll utilize it. You know, it's a tool that they learn to utilize well, and you have that tool right there to achieve that three-tiered saturation that you can achieve just about any type of saturation, emulating just about any type of piece of hardware or hybrid pieces of hardware or different pieces of hardware working together, or just do it justice by not emulating none of it, but adding exactly what it needs as you work on your acute listening and your acute hearing abilities of defining what it's missing by really adding stuff to it and experiment what that does to it and taking that stuff out and until you really start to understand that concept, so that your lower end and your saturation distortion is, you know, micro worked by you to make you that next level master audio engineer, that you understand that that saturation is three tiers that is going to have a phenomenal impact on any sound you work on. And you can take sounds by working those that have issues and mask things to make things sound better sometimes, which is really strange, because sometimes you might have an overabundance of odd harmonics that you really can't filter out with your EQ, but you can add some even harmonics up into it to try to smooth it out a little bit, that it's going to come out sounding like you EQ'd those odd harmonics out a little bit, because they're going to start, it's going to start masking them a little bit with the blending and masking effect to deal with issues. So any one of those things we're talking about was saturation, noise, full spectrum, even odd harmonics, or any of them can have that effect used properly to deal with issues, and working with that system of three tiers of saturation to perfect your lower end and your noise saturation bottom end of whatever you're working on is going to help push you over the edge to make you that next level master engineer and give you complete control of your saturation and how it's applied to anything you're doing. Just remember, clean it up, EQ it well, and then spatialize it well, because, you know, if you do any of those wrong, none of that's going to matter. It'll get lost in it. And just be careful of adding mud. You know, I can make a lot of videos on saturation because it's very in-depth, but if you take these videos that I've talked about in saturation and just understand those concepts, begin experimenting with them, and begin applying those concepts and that mentality, and begin applying it to what you're doing, and beginning cleaning your things up, try it with all the different sounds that you are working on, violins, oboes, your flutes, your vocals, guitars, basses, drums, piano, whatever, synths, whatever you're working on. Begin applying it to it and experiment with it to see what works really well with the stuff you're used to working with. And those of you that are really, you know, do a lot of different stuff all the time, that it's always an experiment anytime you get a new sound, and you just got to mess with it until you figure out what's going to make it sound better. So peace, hope, love. I certainly hope you enjoyed this next video on saturation, and I will see you in the next video.